I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the place of slavery. There was a time when these words actually bothered me because I heard them as a form of manipulation. You know, like when someone does you a kind favor that you think is free, and then only find out later that they're going to hold it over you because now you're in some sort of debt to that individual. That's how I heard these, and I imagine that this was the moment that the Hebrews understood for the first time the real reason God freed them from slavery to Pharaoh was just to make them slaves to himself. And what follows this line seems to prove my point. Because after reminding them of his kindness to them, he then says, you shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not do this. You shall not do that. I, the Lord, am your God. I am a jealous God. You shall not do this, that, or that. Each new limitation imposing itself on their freedom, how is this not slavery? That's how my mind reasoned. And I was wrong. Here's a different way of looking at that. I have a dog, and I want Sky to enjoy all the good things of the world. The different textures like snow and grass and dirt, the unlimited scents, the variety of animal life, all the exciting sounds of being outdoors, the birds chirping, the dogs barking, the kids playing. Because I know all these things are going to stimulate her and they're going to make her happy. And guess what? I'm right. They do every time. They make her excited. The problem, however, is that the world is also dangerous. There is traffic. There are aggressive dogs and unsafe people. At times, there are poisonous chemicals on the sidewalks and on the streets. There are laws governing pets that, if they are broken, will lead her into a shelter and possibly to be euthanized. Now, does Sky understand any of that? No. Does that make it less real? Not at all. And so, my love for her is expressed in a collar and a leash, which in the beginning, she hated. She struggled against it with the full force of anybody struggling for their freedom. She whipped her head back and forth constantly, trying to get out of the collar. She's biting and thrashing at the leash, desperately striving to free herself from its grip. And this, for many people, is their experience of God's law. And God knows this. He said it in Sirach. Sirach says that divine wisdom seems very harsh to the uninstructed. A weakling will not remain with her. She will weigh him down like a heavy testing stone, and he will not be slow to cast her off. And as a society, casting off is exactly what we've done. Every aspect of the Christian life is increasingly viewed as oppressive to human dignity and freedom because it disciplines our passions, and we don't like that. We might think that that just kicked off in the sexual revolution of the 60s and the collapse of morals, but that's not true. This has been a developing thing for hundreds of years. Much of it is owed to the influence of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 1700s. And what Rousseau did was breaking from the Judeo-Christian view of original sin that sees the post-fall man as inclined towards evil all the time and therefore in need of external helps like law. He instead flipped that around, and Rousseau viewed the natural man with all of his desires as intrinsically good. And rather, it's the imposition of external forces like culture and religion and civil law that becomes for man an existential frustration. And that is what leads him to evil behaviors. So how does that play out in real time? Here's an example. Just this past September, a few months ago, Psychology Today, a magazine, published an article defending adultery under the premise that monogamy was unnatural. And the article cites the author Dan Savage, who refers to monogamy as, quote, ridiculous, and blames high divorce rates on its unrealistic expectations. In other words, it is monogamy's fault that spouses cheat and families fail. The adulterer is just embracing his natural self. And so therefore, because adultery is one of the 10 commandments, the 10 commandments are evil. Now, for those of us who are just ready to unleash our passions, and occasionally that's me, this approach is very compelling. It's not my passions that are wayward, it's God's fault. It's his expectations that are not just unreasonable, they're actually evil. But Skye begs to differ, and this is what I think about when I walk her. It's precisely the collar and the leash that gives her freedom and protects her life. They allow her the opportunity to leave the confines of the house, to explore a wider world that is dangerous, but she can do so safely. They chasten her impulses to just dart out into traffic after a squirrel. They help her learn to live in a human society that is as foreign to her as heaven is to us. And they do this for her because the collar and the leash keeps her close to me, who is her guide and her caretaker in a dangerous world. And that is what God's law does for us. It's an extension of himself in our present moment to keep us on the safe, straight, and narrow path. And this should be obvious because of human history. But also, go back to the Hebrews who are receiving that law today. When they left Egypt, Egypt did not leave them. And we see this fulfilled on the day that the 10 Commandments are actually handed to them on the tablets on Mount Sinai. What happens? Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and these people who have just sworn a covenant with God, promised total allegiance, would do whatever he asked, are in the process of worshiping a golden calf and celebrating this festivity of debauchery. It didn't take them very long. And the truth is, no one in this church is much better. And when we go to confession, this should become very obvious to us. Part of a confession is to take the time and make a good examination of conscience. And when we do that, for every person that does it, certain truths should become very clear. One, we are capable of self-deception. This is how we're able to justify almost any sin in the moment that it's convenient. We have vulnerabilities, and they do overpower us from time to time. And that if we let them go, if we unleash them, we are capable of profound evil. And we see this in the news, and we see it in human history all the time. This honest self-reflection should lead to a healthy distrust of self and an appreciation for the law of God that guides us in a dangerous world. But here's the rub. It only works if we cooperate with it, which is why a foundational principle of the spiritual life is that ugly word that none of us likes, obedience. Obedience built on trust. Now for Skye, it took her some time to trust me, to trust that this collar and leash wasn't the enemy of her happiness, but actually the cause of it. And now she's come to understand what the collar and the leash means, so once I grab it, she sits down and she wiggles her little tail, waiting for me to place it on her so that we can go outside. And when she's at her best, she stays close to my side, and there's slack in the leash that allows for ease in the journey. And because of her good behavior, the walks actually become longer. She gets to see more of the world. She takes in more of its scents, more of its smells. And then best of all, having taken my will for her and internalizing it into her little canine heart, in certain environments, I can off-leash her knowing that she will not go far because my law is written in her heart. This is not slavery. When we yield to God in obedience, something beautiful happens. The Holy Spirit takes that law that felt like a burden and places it in our hearts. And we stop struggling against him. There's slack in the leash in our relationship. There's an ease to discipleship, and there's a freedom from the bondage of self. And self-mastery then makes us available for self-gift, and we are glorified, just as God promised. And so Sirach, after describing the burden that it is to take up wisdom's disciplines and to put on wisdom's collar, then says for the one who actually does so, at last you will find the rest she gives, and she will be changed into joy for you. Her fetters will become for you a strong protection, her collar a glorious robe, her yoke a golden ornament, and her bonds a cord of blue. You will wear her like a crown of gladness. Does that sound like slavery to you? Because to me, it sounds like resurrection.